G'day, I call these my floating rim bowls. Why floating rim? Well, the rim looks as though it has been detached or is detached from the rest of the bowl, detached via or by means of this epoxy resin in between the bowl and the rim itself. In this case, and this bowl is the subject of this video, but these are a few bowls that I've done some time ago, and I've used gum nuts cast in the resin instead of, in this case, the pearl powders. So here's one with the gum nuts right through to the other side, and another one, gum nuts right through to the other side. Become quite well known for this. I developed this idea a few years ago, and I've made hundreds of bowls, especially like this one here, but here is my secret to making the floating rim bowl. What I'm using for this project is a piece of red gum, and it is 8 inches across there, which is 200mm by 1.5 inches. I know that's 40mm, so it's somewhere in between 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches. I'll tell you why that's important later on. Well, it's not critical, but I'll show you why I've made note of that anyway. Now I want to attach this to my lathe, and the best way I find is to drill a hole in there, 3/8, I think, 8mm anyway, I know that bit. And I've got this screw chuck here. Now this is a fantastic piece of equipment, this one, made by Vermec. It is a face plate. You can use it just as a face plate, or you can put a screw in there. And the other thing is that I can actually unwind that faceplate from the insert, so I can take this faceplate off and put a bigger one on, for instance. So I'm going to screw that on there like that. Now my hole that I've drilled in here in this piece of wood is not deep enough for that screw, so I've got to pack this out. And I've got these pieces of MDF, it could be plywood, that are my packers, hole drilled in there. They get threaded on there like that. It is best that they are threaded on rather than this one here. It's a bit loose, so it flops around a little bit. I might put one more on. No, it's too much, but I've got different thicknesses, so what I might do, I'll take that one off, just drop everything. So I'll screw that on, and I might use this bigger one here. Now the thing is with these screw chucks is that they're fantastic if we've got our surface area. The surface area is a really critical thing. The chuck basically holds the wood close or firmly in contact with the faceplate. So I'm just going to wind that there, and a good surface area there is good. A bigger surface area would even be better still. I'm going to lock my spindle off and give that a bit of a tighten. And at this point, this is my back. All I'm going to be doing here is truing up this and the back surface and putting a recess in there to take my chuck, the expanding jaws of this chuck here. That's my first task. I'll have a bit more speed. I'm just truing this up. That's the sort of cut I'm using. So I'm using this long edge of my bowl gouge to do that. I can still feel a flat there, so a bit more wood off. So that's running true, and now I'll true up this surface here. Slightly different cut with this. Tool rest a bit low. Need to just pop it up a bit like that so I can get right into the middle. That's running pretty true, not perfectly, but that doesn't matter. Now my jaws are 35 millimeters, so I'm going to set my verniers on a little bit bigger than that and mark out where that diameter is. There it is there. If it's a little bit bigger, it doesn't matter. I could go to 45. In fact, what I might do is go to 45 mil there and use a different set of jaws, because I can with this 8-inch. So I'll just make that a little bit bigger. There we go, that'll be a bit better. So now my recess, don't want to go too deep with this recess, and a skew chisel just as a scraper to flatten that off, or to tidy that up in there, that recess. Nice and clean and sharp. So that's nice and clean. I'll just check that my jaws do actually fit into there. So I'll grab my chuck that I'm going to use, wind the jaws in, will fit there now. That's all I need to do for the moment. I don't need to do any sanding, and I will take the wood off. Check. And tighten that up in there. So push only from the very middle, finger, thumb, tighten that up and see if that's running true. So that is running true. Good. I can now true this piece of wood up. Hear that little wobbling? If I go a little bit faster, I'll get rid of that wobble. Rather than slower, I went faster. So just true up this surface here. And I'm going to put a recess here as well. There's my recess. I'll go quite deep on that, a little bit wider. So that should be clean. I haven't trued up this little bit here, that doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to turn the lathe off, and we need to have a bit of a drawing. So I've got my drawing organised. Now this is important. I have actually done a 1-to-1 drawing, so this is, the scale is 1-to-1, actual size. So you can see here I've got a rectangle which represents my bowl blank before I started doing any shaping, and you can see the shape of the bowl that I wanted to do, and the only thing that I need to adjust is that recess is now a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's the only thing I need to adjust here. Now it's important, well, not critical, but I find it quite advantageous doing this drawing, because there is the trench that I'm going to cut. And you can see that the trench is going to be this shape here. And the reason it's not that shape simply is because that's all going to get turned out later on, and so all of that is going to be waste. So I'm going to eliminate, or sorry, reduce the amount of resin I am going to use by cutting this trench in here to that shape there, and that's just going to help me reduce that amount of waste of resin. Now I've got some measurements here. So the trench that I'm going to do is going to be 10 mil in from the edge, so I can get my verniers 10 mil. Now these measurements are not critical, so there's 10 mil there. So what your measurements are, up to you. You can have a smaller rim there if you want. You can go smaller, but keep to your measurements. I know that trench is it's about 17 millimeters in diameter, so there's 17 mil there, so there's 17 mil in diameter. So that is the width of my trench that I've drawn up in my little drawing. And then I've got to go down. The depth of the trench at this point is 10 millimeters. On the deepest section it's 25 millimeters. And so that's the idea of doing this drawing. Put that to one side, the drawing, and now I need to trench this out. Trenching it out is, well, it's a matter of scraping, and it's a matter of taking it slowly. In other words, because we are scraping, we're putting a lot of force on this wood, and we're also going in quite deep, which puts a lot of force on the tool. So I use thin tools to do this, trenching. So I'm going in there with a parting tool. Now, how do I organise how deep I go there? Well, you can see I've just put some masking tape on. That's from the tip to there is 25 millimeters. So that's the depth that I need to go down to. Hold your parting tool right at the end so you get maximum leverage there. Because that's an awful deep cut for a scraper. Now the tip, I know that, or the bevel itself is 10 mil, so that's the depth of my cut here. Open the cut up. So that's very important that you open the cut up. So this cut here, or this one here, is wider than the parting tool, and that way you won't get the parting tool jammed in there. So now I've got my depth here, I've got my depth over here. And I can now take out all of this material in the middle. Now you could use, if you're up to it, a spindle gouge or a bowl gouge, a small one, and you'll get a lot of that material out. You won't get it all out. It's a bit difficult to get the spindle gouge right in there. Now I've actually made or ground up this tool here, and this is actually my depth. So from there to there is about 15 millimeters, which I used to use quite a lot. So I'd go to that deep there on the shoulder here, but I won't with this one. So it's just a modified scraper. I've kept that narrow, so that's important, that that's narrow. It could even be narrower still, and it's on that angle to help me get the angle that I need in the bottom of the trench. But I'll just reiterate that it is important that the cuts in there are narrow, not wide cuts. So don't try and hog out all of this wood all at once, or else I can almost guarantee the bowl will part company with the lathe. And I'm just running down the side of that trench, just tidy it up, right down the bottom. Turn that lathe off and see what it will look like in there. Not too bad. So now I'm ready to fill this up with resin. Now I have got a crack here, just here. Now when I fill that up with resin, the resin will actually flow through that crack. Now that is why I like this nice and smooth around here. There's another something going on just here. Now resin could come out of that, so prevention is much better than cure with resin. In other words, it's better to make sure you don't have a leak than try and fix the leak. And masking tape is a lot cheaper than resin, so I use a lot of it, and I really make sure that there's no chance of it leaking, and I really press that tape down onto the wood. Where else? There's just that little bit of a crack there, which isn't a big drama, but I'll just put a little bit of tape across there as well. Now another thing that I do is I tend to just slope these edges here, this one inwards and inwards towards the trench. And what that is going to do is if when pouring the resin, I dribble, or I get either side of that trench with a bit of a dribble of the resin, it will help it or direct that resin back into the trench. So that's just a simple little thing, not absolutely critical, but just small. This is a really favourite spindle gouge of mine. I use it quite a lot. It's a little P&N, Patience and Nicholson. So I'm just going to slope that down there like that, a little bit like that. And as I say, that'll help the resin flow into that if I get a bit messy with my pouring. That's all I need to do now. It's not. I'm not going to sand in there. I can take this off the chuck just like that. Get rid of all of that, and there is my trench. And it needs to be fairly clean in there. You don't, but you certainly don't need to sand it. There's no point in sanding in there. But sometimes, depends on what you're putting in this trench, sometimes you can see the wall, and if it's really, really rough, you can see that roughness. Some people won't care about that. So that's it for the lathe. For the moment, we'll go in and pour the resin now. I've got a box of goodies here, and I'll show you what they're about in a sec, but we're going to be pouring some resin into the trench, and I've got my resin mixed up. You just saw that happening. I'm going to make this a little bit more interesting. I'll just do something a little bit different to what I normally do, which is put gum nuts in here, pour the resin over the top and turn it from there. It looks really cool, but I know a lot of you won't be able to get your hands on gum nuts. So I'm going to use one of these pearl powders, and I'm going to mix the pearl powder into my resin. I'm trying to think which colour to use. I've done green before, and that looks quite good. I want to do something a little bit different. Now this is red gum, so it's got a sort of a pinkish red to it, and I'm thinking perhaps I might do a blue this time. So here is bright pure blue pearl powder from Solid Solutions once again. So the company that is making my resin has now got these pearl powders as well. So have a look at my website, they should be there. So I'll put the rest of them to one side. Now I don't think I want to put too much of this in. I sort of want a bit of transparency to this. Or is it translucency? I'm not sure. But I'm just mixing that through there like that, and that's, you've got to give it a bit of a stir because the powder sort of clumps a little bit. So that's looking quite nice at the moment. That'll do me. So I'll give my stick a little bit of a wipe off and start pouring into here. Now I'm going to pour from up on high, and any bubbles will pop as I pour, I hope. So there's one way of eliminating some bubbles. Pour from up high, go all the way around, and that's going to help any bubbles that form just to pop. If you've got a thin stream of resin coming down, it will help pop those bubbles. Remember I beveled the edges a little bit. There we go. I just dribbled off to one side and the resin flows in. There's a dribble off to the other side. It hasn't gone outside the bowl. It stays inside the channel. So just almost at the end here. There's the resin pour. It's about 1/8 of an inch from the top of the channel there. I'm happy with that. I'm actually happy with the colour too. I think that will be quite nice. Now as I said, I'm not going to use a vacuum chamber. I'll just let that cure the way it is. In my workshop, if I'm going to go and do some more work on the lathe and create a lot of dust, then it's probably a very good idea to cover this up. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to put it over in a quiet little corner and let that cure away. Here is my composite blank with the resin and red gum. I have not given it the normal time for curing because of filming constraints. I had to start turning this today. So what I did do is I heated it, and by getting this up to about 70 degrees Celsius for about 3 to 4 hours, you can accelerate the curing time. Now I did that once the resin was touch dry, touch hard that is, and then I put it in basically a thermal oven, sorry, a solar oven, and my solar oven was just made up with this plastic bowl, a clear plastic bowl, and a piece of MDF for a base, and I put that out in the sun with the blank inside it for a few hours. Now that works if you've got some sunshine. It's obviously not going to work if you haven't got the sunshine. The blank on my lathe into that recess that I've already cut, pushing from the middle only and hoping that spins nice and true. Beautiful. And I'm now going to be turning an OG shape into the back of this bowl. Here is my recess that I'm going to use to carry the bowl when I flip it around. So let's go with the turning. I'm using once again my preferred bowl gouges. This is a 10mm woodcut pro tip, so replaceable tip. Now this tip is not a great example because it is getting towards the end of its life, but these are easily my favourite bowl gouges. And I'm just attacking this corner here, and I'm starting the end of the OG, that is that curve that flips out that way. I'm starting that straight away and hoping to find that resin soon, and you will see the resin, the shavings will go from being red to white, or perhaps bluey white. There it is. So I've got that resin exposed. The more I cut in here, the more of that resin I will expose. Now, I normally scrape the resin, but just go slowly, gently, carefully, or else you might chip out that resin. Now I'm doing the other curve of the OG. So this is the concave curve, this is the convex curve. So I'm just roughing the shape out. There's my foot just here, that'd be my foot diameter. About a third of the overall diameter. And you can see I'm now exposing a lot more of that resin. Just going really slowly with that because I don't want to chip it out. Let's see how that looks. I've left about 5mm just here, just so I can have a nice solid rim there, and I'm just going to deal with this with a scraper, a negative rake scraper. Here it is. And the negative rake scraper copes with that really nicely. So this is just high speed steel. You don't need, with resin, you don't need carbide. I use a lot of carbide, but that's because I've more often than not got gum nuts embedded in this resin. So now I'm getting that OG curve, the concave curve. Just with the scraper. So the scraper is just level, the handle is parallel with the floor, and that presents the cutting edge at a negative rake. And negative rake, when the angle of the cutting edge is facing downwards, it is going to be far more gentle a method of cutting or taking wood off or resin off, whatever we're cutting or working on. I like the shape of this negative rake because we've got a flat here, so I use the curved part for my concave shapes and I use the straighter part for my convex curves, like that. So it's a very versatile shape. Now I'm just going to go in there a little bit like so, and then through here, and then around to the more curved section, and there it is. Now for some sanding, I think. Now I'm finishing off my sanding. I started with 120 grit, 180, 240, 320, and this is 500. I find the inertia sander is a great way to sand resin. You can go even further with your sanding if you like. I have found that when I use my finish, put a finish on there, a lot of the sanding marks hardly can be seen. You've got to get it in the right light to see the sanding marks, so I'm happy with 500 grit. So there is the back. I'm going to finish this later on, so I can now flip this over. Get my tool rest in place just below centre. Now I'm going to start turning the resin now, just going slowly, and I'm going to finish the rim before I start hollowing out the rest of the bowl. Just one more cut on the rim and we'll check to see that that's looking good. Now we need to do that. Now we can start hogging out all this material here. And I'm using the flatter section of the curve because this is the flatter section of the curve on the bowl. And then there was a bit of torn grain up here, so I'm going to try and get that out. Just going lightly. And we'll see how that looks. So now I'm going to sand this once again up to 500 grit. Love that curve, it's nice. Run your hand over the curve, it's feeling good. No bumps in there, no high spots, feeling good. So this is my last grit of sandpaper. I tend to sand the resin part more thoroughly, that is into finer grits, than I do this section. The red gum doesn't really need 500 grit, but the resin itself certainly does. Sand the edges, just going to hit those corners a little bit just to soften those corners so they're not so sharp, and then that's it for the sanding and we can get some finish on there. Now I'm using one of my favourite finishes, and that is the Aussie oil, and it is brilliant stuff. The more I use it, the more I like it. It's got a really nice smell. It's really easy to apply. So all you need to do is, and remember, more is not necessarily good with this stuff. So just a little bit on there and work in small areas. So don't try and flood the whole piece all at once. Work in small areas and rub it in, and just keep on rubbing, and it's dry. Look at that, it's basically dry straight away. It's beautiful stuff. So there it is, my floating rim bowl. I think I perhaps should have put a little bit more of the pearl powders in these. It's all right there, but around this side just gets a little bit dull. But there it is on the other side. It certainly looks a lot better on that side, especially this area here. I like that. And I like the way it fades up to almost clear as we get up to the top there. I just wanted, before I finish, I just wanted to tell you a little story about how I came about to develop this idea. As I said early on at the start of the video, I developed this idea a number of years ago and have been using that theme with the gum nuts especially. And it came about by me doing almost exactly what I was doing, but I didn't want, and I'll just grab one of these gum nut ones again. I didn't actually want this band around the back. All I wanted was the resin and the gum nuts on the top surface. But this particular bowl that I did, I had obviously done the trench a little bit too deep, and when I came to cut through the back, I actually cut through the bottom of the trench. Now initially I thought it was a mistake, I thought the piece was ruined, started cursing and carrying on, and then when I'd calmed down a little bit I realised that it had potential, and so I continued on with cutting through the bottom of the trench, and it was then that I realised that it actually looked quite good. So I kept up with the idea. I had these on display somewhere, and somebody came up to me, a wood turner, and said to me, how on earth did you get the rim stuck onto the rest of the bowl? And it was then that I knew that I was on a winner with these. And now you know the secret. So there's my floating rim bowl with the Solid Solutions pearl powders. I hope you got something out of that video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and also like my Facebook page, U-Turn with Brendan Stemp. There I try to keep people up to date with all of the other stuff that's going on with U-Turn. In the meantime, keep turning safely, and I'll see you another time. So that's it for the lathe. For the moment, we'll go in and pour the resin now.
Is that an age thing, the leaking and dribbling?
Yeah, I knew I set myself up for something there.